You think you know what makes someone spiritually strong. You see the quiet meditator in the corner. You watch the passionate dancer with arms raised high. You notice the scholar buried in ancient texts. You assume one path towers above the rest. But here's the thing that will shatter everything you believe about spiritual power. Your worship style isn't just a preference. It's not just tradition or personality quirks. It's actually a direct window into the unique architecture of your spiritual nervous system, and what it reveals might shock you. Think worship is just about following rituals. Think again. Modern neuroscience has cracked the code on what happens inside your brain during different forms of spiritual practice, and the results are mind-blowing. Some worship styles literally rewire your neural pathways for resilience. Others flood your system with stress-reducing chemicals that pharmaceutical companies spend billions trying to replicate. And a few rare approaches actually strengthen the same brain regions that elite athletes use for peak performance. The worship style that speaks to your soul isn't random. It's your brain's way of telling you exactly what kind of spiritual strength you're built for. Picture your brain as a vast cathedral with countless chambers. Every time you engage in worship, you're activating specific neural networks that determine how you process stress and access transcendent states. The contemplative worshiper sitting in silence is firing patterns that enhance self-awareness and emotional regulation. Studies suggest regular contemplative practice thickens the prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function and impulse control. Meanwhile, the expressive worshiper dancing and singing triggers massive releases of endorphins and dopamine, creating a natural high that can last for days. Your brain is building neural highways that make future spiritual experiences more accessible and powerful. But here's where it gets really interesting. The worship style that feels most natural reveals which of the 5 primary spiritual strength archetypes you belong to. The mystic contemplative thrives in silence, building enhanced interoceptive awareness. This is your ability to sense internal bodily signals, and studies show people with stronger interoceptive awareness demonstrate greater emotional intelligence and stress resilience. When contemplatives sit in meditation, they're doing strength training for their vagus nerve, the pathway that regulates everything from heart rate to inflammation. They show measurably lower cortisol levels and stronger immune responses. Their spiritual strength lies in depth. The expressive celebrant finds power through movement, music, and vocal expression. When you worship through dance, song, or passionate prayer, you're activating your brain's reward circuitry in the same way that creates runner's high. Neuroimaging studies reveal that expressive worship triggers synchronized activity across multiple brain regions, creating flow states. These are the brain patterns found in peak performers and creative geniuses. The celebrant's spiritual strength emerges through embodied joy that literally changes brain chemistry. Research suggests regular expressive worship increases activity in areas associated with social bonding and empathy. The intellectual seeker builds spiritual strength through study, analysis, and theological exploration. You might think this sounds dry compared to mystical experiences or ecstatic dancing. You'd be wrong. When the intellectual dives deep into sacred texts or theological concepts, they're engaging the same neural networks that chess grandmasters use during complex problem solving. Studies show that people who approach spirituality through intellectual engagement demonstrate enhanced cognitive flexibility and improved working memory. Their brains literally become more efficient at processing complex information and making connections across seemingly unrelated concepts. The seeker's worship style creates what researchers call crystallized intelligence, a form of wisdom that deepens with age and experience. Their spiritual strength lies in their ability to find transcendence through understanding. The community builder discovers their spiritual power through shared rituals, group worship, and collective experiences. This isn't just about feeling included. When humans worship together, something remarkable happens in the brain. Mirror neurons fire in synchronized patterns, creating what scientists call neural coupling. This is the biological basis for the sense of unity that many describe during group worship experiences. Studies suggest that people who regularly participate in community worship show increased activity in brain regions associated with trust and cooperation. They also demonstrate measurably higher levels of oxytocin, the hormone associated with social bonding and stress reduction. The community builder's spiritual strength emerges through connection that goes beyond individual experience into something genuinely collective. The service warrior finds their deepest spiritual connection through acts of compassion, justice work, and caring for others. Research reveals that when people engage in what they consider sacred service, their brains light up in patterns similar to those found during profound meditative states. This is called the helper's high. And it's not just psychological. Studies show that people who regularly engage in service-oriented spiritual practice have lower rates of depression, stronger immune systems, and even longer lifespans. When the service warrior feeds the hungry or fights for justice, they're activating neural pathways associated with meaning-making and purpose. Their brains are literally wired to find transcendence through action rather than contemplation. Here's what most people miss about spiritual strength. It's not a competition between worship styles, it's about alignment. When your natural worship preferences match your brain's wiring, something powerful happens. You stop forcing yourself into spiritual practices that drain you, and you start accessing the kind of transcendent experiences that actually transform you. The contemplative who tries to find God through loud, energetic worship is like someone trying to write poetry with a sledgehammer. It's the wrong tool for the job. Similarly, the expressive celebrant who forces themselves into silent meditation often experiences frustration rather than peace. They're swimming against their neural current. But here's the plot twist that changes everything. The most spiritually resilient people don't stick to just one worship style. They develop what researchers call spiritual intelligence, the ability to access different forms of transcendence depending on what life demands. Sometimes you need the contemplative's depth to navigate crisis. Sometimes you need the celebrant's joy to break through despair. Sometimes you need the seeker's wisdom to make sense of confusion. Sometimes you need the community builder's connection to heal isolation. Sometimes you need the service warrior's purpose to find meaning in suffering. The spiritually strong person is like a skilled musician who can play multiple instruments, choosing the right one for each song life presents. Research suggests that people who develop this kind of spiritual flexibility demonstrate what psychologists call post-traumatic growth at much higher rates. When crisis hits, they have multiple pathways to transcendence rather than just one. They don't break when their primary worship style becomes inaccessible. Instead, they adapt, finding new ways to connect with the sacred that match their current circumstances and needs. This is spiritual strength in its purest form, the ability to find the divine through any doorway that opens. You want to know the secret that separates the spiritually strong from the spiritually fragile? It's not about having perfect faith or never doubting. It's about developing what researchers call spiritual anti-fragility, the capacity to grow stronger through spiritual challenges rather than simply surviving them. This happens when you understand your primary spiritual language but also learn to speak the dialects. The contemplative learns to find silence even in celebration. The celebrant learns to find joy even in solitude. The seeker learns that mystery is more profound than certainty. The community builder learns to carry connection even when alone. The service warrior learns that sometimes the most compassionate act is rest. Think about the most spiritually resilient people you know. They're not the ones who never struggle with doubt or never face spiritual dryness. They're the ones who have multiple ways to reconnect when one path becomes blocked. They've developed what neuroscientists call cognitive reserve, the brain's ability to maintain function even under stress. But in spiritual terms, this becomes something even more powerful. It becomes the ability to find the sacred even when your usual pathways are disrupted by crisis, loss, or life transitions. Studies show that people with diverse spiritual practices demonstrate greater resilience during major life changes. Divorce, job loss, illness, death of loved ones, these experiences that shatter many people's faith become opportunities for spiritual deepening when you have multiple worship languages to draw from. The contemplative facing noise and chaos can shift into service mode, finding the sacred through caring for others. The celebrant facing depression can shift into seeking mode, finding comfort through study and reflection. This isn't spiritual weakness, it's spiritual evolution. But there's something even deeper happening here that most people never discover. Your worship style also determines how you process spiritual trauma and doubt. Yes, spiritual trauma is real, and your brain handles it differently depending on how you typically connect with the sacred. The contemplative who experiences spiritual crisis often withdraws deeper into solitude, which can either lead to breakthrough or breakdown depending on whether they have alternative pathways. Research suggests that contemplatives who develop expressive outlets show faster recovery from spiritual trauma. They need a way to externalize the internal storm. Meanwhile, the expressive celebrant facing doubt often loses their voice entirely. Their spiritual strength was tied to joy and movement, so when those feel impossible, they think they've lost their connection to the divine. But studies reveal that celebrants who develop contemplative skills actually deepen their faith during crisis. The silence teaches them that the sacred exists even when they can't feel it. Here's what's fascinating about spiritual doubt from a neuroscience perspective. Doubt isn't the opposite of faith. It's actually a sign that your spiritual neural networks are sophisticated enough to question and refine themselves. Brain imaging studies show that people going through spiritual questioning have increased activity in areas associated with critical thinking and meaning making. This is your brain doing quality control on your belief system. The spiritually strong don't avoid doubt, they learn to worship through it. The contemplative finds God in the darkness. The celebrant learns to dance with questions. The seeker discovers that mystery is more satisfying than certainty. The community builder finds strength in shared uncertainty. The service warrior acts with compassion even when they're not sure why. Your primary worship style reveals your spiritual strength, but your willingness to explore other styles determines your spiritual potential. The brain research is clear on this. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new neural pathways, doesn't stop in childhood. Every time you engage with a new form of worship, you're literally building new spiritual muscles. The contemplative who occasionally joins community worship is strengthening their social connection networks. The intellectual who sometimes engages in expressive celebration is enhancing their emotional processing abilities. The service warrior who develops a contemplative practice is building the inner resources needed for sustainable compassion. Here's the final revelation that ties everything together. Spiritual strength isn't measured by how intensely you experience the sacred. It's measured by how consistently you can access transcendence across the full spectrum of human experience. Joy and sorrow, community and solitude, certainty and doubt, action and rest. The spiritually strong person has developed multiple doorways to the divine, and they know which door to use in each season of life. This isn't spiritual relativism where all paths lead to the same place. It's spiritual intelligence where different paths serve different purposes in the grand architecture of a resilient spiritual life. There's one more layer to this that changes everything about how you understand spiritual maturity. Advanced practitioners of any worship style eventually discover what researchers call the paradox of spiritual strength. The deeper you go into your natural worship style, the more you realize its limitations. The master contemplative discovers the need for community. The seasoned celebrant finds power in silence. The scholarly seeker learns that some truths can't be analyzed. The community leader discovers the necessity of solitude. The dedicated service warrior learns that sometimes the most radical act is simply being. This isn't a failure of their primary style, it's graduation to a higher level of spiritual sophistication. Brain studies of long-term spiritual practitioners reveal something remarkable. After years of dedicated practice in one style, their neural patterns begin to show characteristics of all 5 spiritual archetypes. The contemplative's brain develops enhanced social connection networks. The celebrant's brain shows improved analytical capabilities. The seeker's brain demonstrates increased empathy and compassion centers. The community builder's brain develops stronger introspective awareness. The service warrior's brain shows enhanced contemplative and analytical functions. It's as if deep spiritual practice eventually leads all paths toward integration. Your worship style might be your starting point, but it's not your destination. So here's your challenge. Your primary worship style is your spiritual home base, the place where you most naturally encounter the sacred. But don't let it become your spiritual prison. The contemplative needs to occasionally dance. The celebrant needs to occasionally sit in silence. The seeker needs to occasionally serve without analyzing. The community builder needs to occasionally worship alone. The service warrior needs to occasionally rest in pure being. This isn't betraying your spiritual nature. It's fulfilling your spiritual potential. What worship style feels most natural to you, and which style challenges you the most? Hit that like button if this changed how you think about spiritual strength. Subscribe for more insights that bridge science and spirituality, and drop a comment sharing your own worship style discoveries. Share this video with someone who might be forcing themselves into the wrong spiritual box. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is help someone find their own unique pathway to the sacred.